Hello, welcome to my channel and welcome you to my champion guide. Today I want to give you an in-depth guide of the champion, including all promotion classes, and I've been playing the champion for a couple of months now and I feel quite familiar with it. Did a lot of research, so I wanted to share those information with you. In this video I'm gonna cover the passive training, the playable races, the talents and abilities, what equipment I would recommend, the attributes that you should focus on and what there is consider, the stats that all the combination of the former leads to, and last but not least the disciplines that you can equip and that are a good choice in my opinion. So let's start with the passive training. Hello, the first thing we're going to talk about is the passive training. So for combat, you will have to start with training the combat basics and training it up to 75%. Those are how I set the skills. I definitely take the attack power, those critical hit pips, more attack power, the hard control intensity, since this increases the duration of the stun and the knockdowns, which I'm doing a lot. A very good second choice is the move control intensity, since you're going to slow a lot, especially if you're going with the illusionist's discipline. Then you're going to take organic armor penetration, physical armor penetration, and the elemental armor penetration, so you can get to that last pip. On the top tree, just pick any path that you like. I personally took this one, and then you can max out the last pip, which is pretty cool because it gives you an additional 100 health. Then it's up to your personal preference if you go down the armor tree and specialize into plate if you're going with the pit fighter promotion class, or mail if you're going with the barbarian or the alpha fighter specialization class. I'm going to talk about the specialization classes later. For the weapon specialization, if you want to go more offensive first, you go weapons, then melee, and then the great melee weapon. Available races for the champion are the Centaur, the Half-Giant, the Minotaur, and the Stoneborn. If you want to learn more about the races, check out my last video. You can find the link in the upper right corner. I'm going to skip this for this guide since I already got it covered and we have a lot of other stuff to talk about. So let's talk about talents. The first talent we want to take is spinning back fist, because we have to take it. Just to talk about the skill a little, be aware that the first skill is going to deal crushing damage, so this will be especially good when you're playing with a mace. And the kicksand ability, which is the second in the chain, will blind enemies, so they won't see stuff for quite a while. Then here we have guts, which increases our critical chance. This is hard to get by, so we take all of them. Same goes for armaments. This gives us 15% more critical damage. Then the leap power, that's our main movement ability. We can use this twice and we'll also deal damage with it. The leap ability will have a special effect added depending on the specialization class you will go into. Next thing we want to take is throw hurlbat, because you can apply this. This is a ranged ability, so you can apply this over 40 meters. People you attack, especially squishies, will run away from you, so it's good to slow them because you want to attack them. The vicious stomp is a very important ability. You have the first one just deals regular damage, and the second chain you have the choice between disarming shout, which will suppress the enemy for 6 seconds. Suppress prevents a character to use abilities. The rend is great to apply damage, because this applies a bleed that will deal damage over time. Decent damage, so we take that as well. Then here those next abilities: the exploration slot, a minor slot, and the massive cleave is the next ability. Here I would take at least 1 point. What we definitely want is Whirling Pain, because here we're also going to have synergies depending on the promotion class you're going to take. We'll also always gonna want the domination, 3 points. This gives us 150 extra attack power. This is our bread and butter where we get our damage up. The minor discipline slot here is also an obligatory take, in my opinion. Also here the critical strike should be improved by 1. Gives us again 3% of critical strike. The armor penetration is something you should always take up to 3 points. You will be dealing a significant amount with basic attacks, so this should also be up to 3 slots. Here again, the minor discipline slot is obligatory. The control defense depends if you're going to be stunned a lot. What I usually do here in the middle is I always take those obvious choices. So the second wind ability heals you for 25% of your total health once you drop below 50 health. This is excellent for survivability, and you should always take this ability in your passive slots as well. Those two you should also always take the major discipline slots because you will want to equip mages. My preferred build here, no matter if you want to deal damage or if you want to fulfill another role, is the Pit Fighter, because it allows you to wear plate armor, which increases your survivability, and you in general, it's easier for you to survive on the battlefield. So this increases your personal healing modifier. The next skill we want to pick is basically all in your specialization class. So here we get an extra 150 attack power. The skill Leap to Safety enhances our leap to heal us when we are more than 30 meters away from the closest enemy after the second leap when we are below 50 health. This can only occur every 90 seconds. Our Retaliate now also creates 35 stamina over 7 seconds. We get the Invincible Warrior ability, which is an alternative ultimate to the Neckbreaker. This is also a heal over time that applies a barrier, great for survivability. And here our Whirling Pain that we picked in the middle also gives us a damage preventing barrier. The Almighty Hugeness improves our maximum health and increases the amount healed by Ultimate Warrior. So, of course, we take the Pit Fighter ability for the passive, where whenever we heal ourselves, we get an extra 150 attack power. So, whenever you take the Pit Fighter specialization, you should always pick the Ultimate Warrior because of the passive talents improving your Ultimate Warrior. Whatever specialization you pick, you always want to pick only one of those 3 warrior types because they, so to say, share the same resource, so you don't want to waste one of your points on one of the other 2 warrior abilities, so always only pick one of those. Now let's talk about the other 2 specialization classes. Also for those 2 you always want to take all 3 of those points. If you want to play a bit more damage focused and say you don't need the extra survivability that the Pit Fighter gives you, you of course take those extra 150 attack power, you take this extra 3% critical hit chance, you take the Dominant Smashing, where the first ability of your basic attack grants you a point of dominance whenever you critically hit. Rend and Butcher improves the Rend ability to reduce the enemy critical strikes defense for 7%. So this means whenever you have a bleed on the target, you deal extra damage with your critical hits. The Dominant Leap also increases your leap to create a point of dominance whenever you leap. So you want to use this as often as possible to stack up the dominance power. Creating and consuming dominance is a mechanic of the Alpha Warrior. So what basically happens here is whenever you use the leap or hit critically with one of your basic attacks, you generate 1 stack of dominance, which is indicated around your class icon down here. Certain abilities are a guaranteed critical hit when they consume a pip of dominance. Your Neckbreaker gets the cost reduced to 350 and consumes a point of dominance when it critically hits. Barbary also increases your armor penetration by an additional 3%, and the Alpha Warrior increases your critical strike chance by 5% for 15 seconds whenever you spend a point of dominance. So this is synergy-wise pretty interesting because you not only automatically crit when you spend a point of dominance. Third promotion class I want to talk about is the Barbarian. The first skill here improves your movement control intensity by 7%, so it's great for slowing, blinding, and knocking down your targets. It also improves your attack control intensity by a total of 21%. The Brutal Follow-up enhances your Brutal Warrior, which is this ability here. So the regular ability inflicts a knockdown and damages enemy while applying a barrier of 20% of your maximum health. This ability here enhances this Brutal Warrior to also reset the cooldown of spinning back fist and kicking sand. So this means extra damage and more blinding enemies whenever you use Ultimate Warrior. This ability enhances your Whirling Pain to first slow the enemies and then suppressing the enemies. The Death from Above enhances your Leap to also inflict knockdown when hitting enemies. The radius of this ability isn't too wide, so you have to aim quite thoroughly, but this ability here, the Barbarian, if you really need a CC machine in your fight that has high mobility, the Barbarian is really good to knock down people and allow your team to pump this damage out. And of course you get the Barbarian passive, which increases the damage bonus by 15% in combat and the movement speed by 25% whenever you apply a crowd control effect. So also here, when you stun people, when you slow people, when you blind people, you get this extra damage and this extra movement speed. The remaining 8 points that we have left, I usually put in Outrage to get faster rage regeneration inside of combat and slower rage loss outside of combat. And I usually put an extra 3 points in Fortification to increase the resist all by another 3%. The remaining 2 points should really be spent by your preferences. Since I usually use my champion for harvesting as well, I take the extra stamina. So here are the talent trees again, for you to check them out again. What I want to note regarding equipment is the Alpha Warrior can only wear mail, the Pit Fighter can wear plate, and the Barbarian can also wear mail. So let's talk about the equipment. The champion can wear great axes as well as great maces. The statistics you want to have on a great axe is attack power, critical damage, critical strike, and dexterity, as well as final damage modifier. You will get attack power anyway, but you don't need to focus on that due to value caps. I'm gonna explain later what this means in detail. The value on the chest piece is preferably damage bonus. It should be crushing when you're using a mace, and the damage bonus should be slashing when you're using a great axe. The statistics critical amount ore and critical chance ore is for harvesting, so whatever you're harvesting, get that harvesting bonus on your chest plate. The preferred values on your boots, helmet and gloves is anti-critical strike, unless you want to go with something else, because anti-critical strike helps you against any type of damage that you are receiving. Regarding jewelry, you should aim for rings with critical strike, dexterity and final damage modifier, or critical strike and final damage modifier and personal healing modifier if you are playing a pit fighter, because the pit fighter benefits greatly from the personal healing modifier as well. Regarding the necklace, I would go for attack power, critical damage and health regeneration. When you click on details, this opens up this detailed stat part. So depending on whether you're using a great axe, you should try to maximize the slashing armor penetration as well as the slashing damage multiplier. If you have a great mace, those should both be aimed for crushing. Final damage modifier helps you with both weapons. Other values you should focus on is the armor, so you can mitigate more damage, the barrier bonus, which increases your shield, the anti-critical strike chance, and the personal healing modifier if you are playing the Pit Fighter specialization. For the Alpha Fighter specialization, you should trying to maximize your critical damage bonus, since when you consume dominance, you will automatically critically hit anyway. And with the Barbarian, you should go for heart control and movement control modifier. In case you have any campaign badges from the early campaigns, I can highly recommend in general to equip the Trial of Vulcan, which increases your final damage modifier by 2%. There is also a badge which increases the bleed damage. I wouldn't even, but still wouldn't go for that with the bleed damage, since it's only the bleed damage by 3% and you're gonna deal a lot of damage with other abilities as well, so I think the Trial of Vulcan is far more valuable here. Before we go to the base disciplines, I want to talk about the base values to the right here as well. So your primary attribute is basically strength. You should put points into strength as long as your cap power reaches a value where you will get to the theoretical attack power cap of 1000, subtracting the amount of attack power that your abilities, passive abilities, and disciplines give you. On my champion, for example, I tried not to get over 700 attack power, since I was using the Pit Fighter specialization, which gives me an extra 150 attack power whenever I heal myself, and the Force Mage, where my auto attacks have a chance to create a barrier that mitigates damage and additionally give me another 100 attack power. So with those two additional bonuses that add up to 250 attack power, I want to make sure that my base character doesn't lose those 250 extra attack power. That's why I stopped there and stopped putting points in strength and put them rather in dexterity in order to get my critical strike and my resist rate up. You should also keep in mind that the attack power on your weapon, rings and equipment also raise your attack power. So I advise you, when you get a vessel, first make sure that you equip all the items before you spend those points in strength, dexterity or whatever, and then max out your strength values up to the value that the attack power minus the bonuses that you are using add up to this 1000 attack power, because you don't want to go over the cap, because everything you go over is lost and it's better spent in other values. Now we get to the last point, the disciplines. I usually run my champion Pit Fighter with Blade Master and Force Mage if I want to go for AoE damage, but I would even prefer, at the time of making of this guide, prefer the Illusionist. I'll explain to you what those do just in a minute. So I basically started off with that I had made the decision for myself that I wanted to go with the Pit Fighter, because in larger fights the high sustain is key of staying alive, especially if you're new to the game. So this helped me a lot to just stay alive long enough to make damage, and now I came to the conclusion that I don't have that much impact on the whole battle, because I was going for the tankiness in the beginning, and there I found a good foundation with the Pit Fighter. Then I thought, okay, how can I deal out this consistent damage that's actually useful? So of course single target appeared quite nice, and then the thing is with the rent. So the thing is, with the Rend, you already have a quite good ability output for a bleed. So I was looking for a second ability, and I found one on the Blade Master that forced me to switch from maces to axes. So basically you have those 2 bleeds that you can dish out, and I actually did some number crunching on that and figured out that my damage is actually with 92,000 damage on the 3 practice dummies with all white equipment, like basic self-crafted white gear. So if you equip yourself on white gear from War Tribes, you should have around the same numbers, I guess, unless they changed something. And so I thought about what a good second discipline could be. That brought me to Knife Grinder. But then with Knife Grinder, so what Knife Grinder does, what I was interested in was the tenderize. So to get a stackable bleed mitigation debuff. But it wasn't significant. In the same 2 minutes I lost about a bit less than 20% damage, so maybe 18% damage, I'd say. So Knife Grinder actually reduced my damage for me equipping it, so I thought, nah, that's not an option. Gotta have to look for something else. And then what I basically ended up with was Illusionist on the same target, because like when you take those base numbers, what it does is you have 2 passives. Usually I have only room for equipping one of them. We still have to talk about which abilities and skills to equip. So Hotfoot I would leave out because it only slows people on your last basic attack, but since you have the Hurlbat, which is a ranged ability, up all the time, this is actually better, so you can always keep the damage buff that Phantom Veins give you up, which increases your damage against slowed enemies. I think it's around, well, at the time of making of this guide, it's 20%, which is massive. And if you're already if you're still low on attack power, you get this buff with a 45-second cooldown, which increases your attack power by 150. And of course you can get invisible, not invincible. They nerfed the champion too much for that to be true. But I still love him. I still like to fight him, and he's still very strong. He just stays alive, and alive players usually deal the most damage. But to the next discipline, another option is of course Force Mage. So if you say, I actually care a bit more about the whole dealing AoE damage out, then you can go. The second ability you get from the Blade Master is also an AoE bleed that you apply, so throwing that into groups is always nice. And Kinetic Boost also gives you a 20% total boost, damage boost, so actually not this one person gets more damage when you're singling out on one, but running the Force Mage with the same combination gives you a more steady AoE output of the Netbreaker and the Blade Master bleed when you time those right with the Kinetic Boost. You can also push enemies away, which is a channeled ability, and the Reactive Barrier, which creates a barrier around you and gives you another 100 attack power. Then I also worked around a bit with mace builds. One that I find very, very interesting but requires you to play together with a confessor is the Educator. So with the Educate you just have holy damage, which can't be mitigated, so that is always good to throw out on cooldown. And the Prosecute. If you have some paladins occasionally apply a stack of sin, but confessors are really good at saying, okay, the sin is going to stack up on this target now, but you would have to find one who doesn't rely on consuming the sin himself to do the damage, because that's what you want to do. So if you have a confessor that has the ability to apply sin effects but doesn't rely on consuming them to boost his own damage, then you could jump in with a champion mace educator build. Those prosecutes on white equipment I managed to dish out between 2,500 and 3,000 damage with one attack when they critted on white gear. So I think if you do this at good gear and you get your crit damage up, and if you're, well, it won't work with the definite crits that you get from the Alpha Warrior build. So yeah, just very high. Well, you have to max the crit at 50 as fast as possible, work with a lot of attack power buff that you time right with those. But the hardest part is so far to find a confessor, because when I find a confessor who's willing to do that, champions and confessors, I think, could potentially become the next burst machines of the next meta we're coming to going. If this is going to happen, I might have added some inspiration to the community, but I guess a lot of people have already seen this, that a prosecute on a champion works very well with a confessor. I haven't seen this yet, though. Nobody has done it. Some other mazes which are interesting if you're purely using the champion for leveling. You could go a pit fighter maze build with Holy Avenger. The Holy Avenger is a maze build where you have the battle chant, and it creates an aura of hammers around you. And the very interesting thing is you can still continue casting other spells. It's basically an activate, you have an AoE around you, and you can keep playing. This is a very, very interesting thing, and I have to say I always felt like playing this a bit as well with the champion, because I think you can, like, you don't get that good numbers out of it if you compare the values that we got up here with the Whirling Pain and the Bloodstrike from the Blade Master. We get 92 out. On the bottom, on 3 dummies, we still get 83 out, so we're actually pretty close. It's just a Holy Avenger champion build is really like, you are the front line. You want to be inside of the enemies. You want to push them forward or to flip below. Yeah, like you want them, okay, you're either in or you're out, because I am just dealing damage constantly. And you get an extra stun on the second ability of the Garbarth's hammer. So could be very nice or very interesting also for a barbarian build, because you stun someone, you get more movement speed and more damage. So that's always pretty cool. And I mean, getting the CC out, it's sometimes key to finish people. Another nice discipline is the Mudman. Well, it makes you more resistible against crushing damage. So all those other people who will most likely be hitting you in the front line will likely have some maces as well, because maces are quite effective against other plate-wearing classes. And I love Mud Spatter, Mug Spatter, actually. Your crushing attacks trigger an area blindness disease. So basically, when people hit you with crushing damage, I think that's the way it works, then you blind them, which is pretty nice. Juggernaut is always a good pick if you want to stay tanky. You can give the group a toughness buff, which increases their maximum health by, I don't know what, 20%? 50%? Have to check the numbers. Unstoppable gives you and your group crowd control immunity. Spite is a passive that heals you when you get knocked down or stunned. And your retaliate gives you more resolve. So resolve makes you more resistant to crowd control. Mole Hunter is great for exposing stealth classes. Plague Lord is always a very good pick, because you can reduce healing on the target that you're attacking, so great debuffing discipline. Runecaster is great for defensive purposes. The Rune Shield increases the elemental resistance when you're standing inside the circle. Several other useful buffs. This discipline is not only useful on the champion, but also against the champion or other classes that work with barriers, the Secular Knight, for example, because you don't only cancel the shield, you also punish the barrier use, so you actually take away their shield and you give them damage mitigation debuff after you remove the shield. So this is very good if you wanna deal with champions in the enemy frontline. The Siege Engineer is a generally good pick when you're going for sieges because you can repair catapults, ballistas and trebuchets. You can also boost their damage and also give them a damage mitigation buff, so you mitigate 90% of the receiving damage of the catapult. So if you want to go to a siege and you want to help, but you have no idea what you're supposed to do, bring one siege engineer. Just take one useful discipline for PvP, but if you want to take that keep, bring a siege engineer and just stand next to anything that is built up by somebody else, because whoever builds it up usually has a plan how to use it, but he might not have enough siege engineers in his own guild, and so this is a very, very great way for new players and randoms to help. Siege engineer, bring the siege engineer. The standard bearer, always great. It gives you, it places banner, so if you like the guy who runs around and dictates, okay, this is where we fight, this is a good spot. Putting a banner in the ground helps you a great deal with saying, okay, this is where we go now, this is where we group up, this is where we fight. It changes every type of damage into electricity damage and increases the electricity resistance of the group. So that's a very interesting mechanic, I find. And then you have the rallying banner, where you increase the attack power of the group and you heal people when they are below a certain health threshold, and it cleanses slows. So very good defensive banner to put up those, actually both of them. And it also gives you increased crit chance when you're standing still. So the Troubadour is very interesting because it not only increases your critical strike up here, but also gives you a song that increases the damage that enemies take by everybody. So also you're actually buffing the damage of your group members. So I would say if anybody would ask me about what's the meta, I would say the meta is one in your group runs Troubadour on every 5-man group that you have. That's what I would do. Underdog, it's if you want to be the underdog, like underdog is great because you need 2 passive slots, and then when you get knocked down, you return with increased attack power, and it's substantial. It's 150, I think. And no, payback is it, and increased critical strike chance after you retaliated. So especially on low levels, those give you a very nice boost. So underdog, if that's your playstyle, that's also you can go with. I would say the guards that's inside the keep count for a group of 10 people. That's about the ratio that I feel it is at the moment. So that said,